The scent of her perfume still hangs in the air of our silent apartment. It's December 26th, 3 a.m. The ghost of Christmas is a shattered ornament under my bare feet. She's sleeping in the next room, a soft, contented smile on her lips, the same lips I saw pressed against his in the glow of a downtown bar window last night. My world didn't end with a scream, but with a silent, seismic crack. I stood there in the falling snow, a ghost watching my own life play on without me. And then she came home. She kissed my forehead, her fingers cold from the night, and whispered, "I missed you, my love." The lie was so tender it stole the breath from my lungs. I am a museum of our memories. Every book, every blanket, every half-drunk mug of cocoa holds the echo of her laugh. But now, each echo is a lie. The painting I did of her, which she said she'd cherish forever, now watches me from the wall with empty, mocking eyes. How do you mourn someone who is still breathing in your bed? How do you bury a love that the other person has already forgotten, but still performs like a well-rehearsed play? I touch the ice of the window. My reflection is a stranger's. The man who loved her blindly died in that snowfall. The man who remains, he has a different purpose now. This isn't a story about winning her back. This is the story of how I learned to stop being the background character in my own life. And it begins with a single, silent decision, made in the dark, while she dreams of someone else. The key turned in the lock at 1:17 a.m. A soft click that sounded, to me, like a bone breaking. I sat in the living room dark, the only light the cold, blue glow of the Christmas tree we'd decorated together 2 days before. She tiptoed in, a silhouette weighted with false guilt, believing she was sneaking in past a sleeping boyfriend. The scent hit me first. Not just the winter cold clinging to her wool coat, but something else. Beneath the familiar notes of her vanilla perfume, a scent I'd chosen for her last birthday, was something sharper, spicier. A cologne that was woodsy and expensive, a smell that did not belong in our home, on her skin. She shrugged off her scarf, a red one I'd wrapped around her neck this morning with a kiss, and the movement released another wave of it. My stomach turned. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice a practiced blend of surprise and tenderness. She came to me, a vision in the twinkling lights. Snowflakes were still melting in the dark strands of her hair, like tiny dying stars. She leaned down to kiss my forehead. Her lips were cold. "I missed you, my love. It was such a boring work party. I just couldn't wait to get home to you." Every word was a pristine, delicate lie. I watched it leave her mouth, a beautiful, poisonous performance. Her eyes, the ones I'd written poems about, darted to the tree, to the window, to my hands, anywhere but to my searching gaze. I said nothing. My silence was a new language she couldn't interpret. I just stared, memorizing the perfect architecture of her betrayal. The slight smudge of lipstick, a darker shade than the one she'd left with. The faint, happy exhaustion in her expression that didn't come from office small talk. I stood up. "You must be frozen," I said, my voice a stranger's, flat and calm. "I'll make you some tea." I moved to the kitchen, my movements robotic. I filled the kettle, the sound of the water impossibly loud. She hummed in the living room, a tune I didn't recognize. My heart wasn't racing, it was a frozen stone in my chest, heavy and dead cold. I made her tea, the way she liked it, with a spoonful of honey. My hands did not shake. In the morning, I made pancakes. A domestic ghost going through the motions. She chattered, a bright, nervous monologue about Karen from accounting's ugly sweater, about the bad punch. Her laughter was a little too high, a little too frequent. I placed the plate before her, and she kissed my knuckle. "You're my sweetheart," she said. The lie was so tender it felt like a physical cut. Later, as she sang in the shower, steam fogging the bathroom mirror, I walked to the coat rack. My fingers brushed the damp wool of her red scarf. I lifted it, burying my face in it. His scent was a flag planted in my territory. Then, methodically, I slid my hands into the pockets of her coat. My fingers closed around a crumpled slip of paper. It was a receipt. The paper was thick, expensive. The Grand Elm Hotel, Bar and Lounge. 2 glasses of Veuve Clicquot. Timestamp, 11:08 p.m. A charge for $48. Last night. The numbers blurred. The sound of the shower was a distant roar. I saw it all, the low lights, the clink of glasses, her leaning in, the laughter in her eyes that wasn't for me. The kiss I'd witnessed was just the finale. This was the prelude, paid for by credit card. I didn't crumple it. I didn't scream. I smoothed the paper out with a terrifying calm, my fingers numb, my soul detached. I slid it back into the exact fold of the pocket where I'd found it. The hunt for the full truth, piece by shattering piece, began in that silent, ordinary moment, with the water running and the ghost of our happy Christmas still haunting the air. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about evidence. Confrontation would give her the power to explain, to lie, to spin the story into something I'd maybe, desperately, want to believe. My silence is my only weapon. So, I become an archaeologist of our ruin, digging through the layers of a love I now realize was a carefully constructed exhibit. It begins in the digital catacombs. At night, while she sleeps a deep, untroubled sleep beside me, I scroll through my phone. Our photos glow in the dark. Here we are at the beach, her smile wide and real as she splashes me. My smile, in every single picture, is blindingly, stupidly devoted, the look of a man who believed he'd won the universe. I swipe through years of this curated joy. Us at the pumpkin patch, us cooking pasta in this very kitchen, us with the silly matching Christmas sweaters from just last week. Every image is a lie. The narrative wasn't ours, it was hers. I was just the faithful audience, applauding on cue. I open our text thread, a novel of our intimacy. I scroll back to the beginning. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," I'd written after our first date. "I feel so safe with you," she'd replied. Now, the words don't read like promises, they read like lines from a script. Her parts were expertly crafted to elicit my next devoted response. I was the dupe, the mark in a beautiful, long con of the heart. I need to feel the geography of the lie. The next day, I tell her I'm running errands. I go to the little indie bookstore where we first met, where our hands brushed reaching for the same copy of a poetry anthology. The air still smells of old paper and dust. I stand in the exact aisle. It feels hollow, a stage set after the play has closed. The magic is gone, leaving only the cheap plywood and painted backdrops. I drive to the park bench where I told her I loved her for the first time, the words torn from me in a rainstorm. Today, the sun is shining. The bench is just a bench. The memory is just a scene she once starred in. The final pilgrimage is the most painful. I go to the community art studio I'd rented for us, where sunlight used to flood the dusty space. This is where I painted her. The large canvas, now covered in a sheet, leans against the far wall, a monument to my blindness. The room is cold, the heater long since turned off. My breath fogs in the air. My tools are where I left them. I don't approach her portrait. Instead, I sit at my drafting table, a clean sheet of paper before me. I pick up a stick of charcoal. My hand, which used to tremble with the anxiety of getting her likeness just right, is now steady. I don't draw her eyes, her smile, the curve of her neck I once knew better than my own name. I close my eyes, and I see the crack. The one that split my world in two on a snowy street. I see the fracture in the Christmas tree ornament, in the ice on the window, in the false foundation of our shared life. I open my eyes and let the charcoal meet the paper. It's not a portrait of a person. It's the portrait of a breaking. A single, jagged, seismic fault line, tearing through a blank expanse. It is stark. It is violent. It is the truest thing I've created in years. As I finish, my fingers black with dust, I realize I am not documenting our past anymore. I am mapping the contours of my new, shattered reality. The first sketch for the man I will have to become, the digital receipt, was a fact. The scent was a feeling. But a ghost isn't enough to haunt you properly, it needs a face. I needed to see him. It was a masochistic, compulsive need, like pressing on a bruise to feel its precise boundaries. I needed to give the phantom in our bed a name. I found him with a terrifying ease. Her company's team page. There he was, third from the left. Mark from marketing. The colleague she described once, waving a hand dismissively over dinner. Ugh, he's so annoying. Always trying to be the fun one. So shallow. I'd refilled her wine glass, sympathetic. I'd been her echo. I fell into the abyss of his social media. His world was a study in curated gloss. Ski trips in Aspen, sunglasses reflecting perfect snow. Rooftop cocktail parties where everyone's smiles were too white, too wide. Fancy cars, designer watches, a life of sleek, empty surfaces. This was the world she told me she despised, the noise, the pretension, the lack of substance. Another lie. She hadn't hated it. She'd simply told me she did, to keep me comfortable in our quiet, modest world, while she sampled the glitter on the side. My scrolling became a desperate, sick ritual. I did it in the bathroom with the door locked. I did it on my phone under the desk at work. I was digging for my own grave with my thumbs. And then, I found it. A group photo from the office Christmas Eve party. The caption read, "Great team, greater times. #holiday cheer." It was a flash of sequins and ugly sweaters. My eyes scanned the blurry background, past the grinning faces. There, by the mahogany bar, was a familiar sleeve of a crimson dress. Her dress. And resting on the forearm of a man in a dark suit, Mark's forearm, was her hand. Not an accidental brush. A deliberate, possessive placement. Her fingers were curved, relaxed, as they used to be on my arm when we walked together. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. The evidence was no longer a ghost. It had a face. Square jaw, a confident, smug smile aimed at the camera, an arm around a coworker while her hand claimed him in the shadows. It had a name. Mark. It had a life, a glossy, vapid, attractive life that had somehow siphoned mine away. I couldn't stay in the apartment with her sleeping breath in the next room. I drove downtown, my hands cold on the wheel. I parked across from the sleek glass tower that housed their office. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Punishment, perhaps. And then, he emerged. He was taller in person. He wore a tailored coat and laughed loudly on his phone, tossing his head back in a way that spoke of endless ease. He lit a cigarette, leaning against the building, completely at home in his own skin, in the world he'd stolen a piece of mine. I didn't move. I just watched from the cold interior of my car. My own reflection superimposed itself onto the glass of the building behind him, a pale, silent face in the growing dark, framed by the steering wheel. The contrast was absolute. Him, vibrant, loud, unburdened. Me, a specter, a man dissolving in a reflection, burning with a rage so quiet it felt like the beginning of death. I wasn't a heartbroken boyfriend anymore. I was a witness. And a witness, once they have seen the crime, can never go back to being just an observer. Our anniversary arrived wrapped in the same deceptive frost as the world outside. She had planned everything, a dinner at the impossibly expensive, dimly lit French restaurant she'd always called too stuffy for us. Her guilt had a price tag, and it was extravagance. She wore the black dress I loved, her makeup flawless, her smile a practiced masterpiece of affection. I wore the suit she'd picked for me, feeling like a mannequin dressed for his own funeral. The dinner was a masterclass in duplicity. She reminisced about our first year, telling stories I now heard as auditions for the role of perfect girlfriend. She reached across the table to hold my hand, her fingers cool. "You're my everything," she said, her eyes shimmering in the candlelight. The lie was so beautiful it felt like a kind of art. I squeezed her hand back, my smile a careful construction. "And you're mine," I replied, the words ash in my mouth. The gift exchange was the climax of the play. She presented a small, velvet box with a flourish. Inside, nestled on black satin, was a sleek, silver watch. It was minimalist, expensive, cold to the touch. A thing of precise engineering, meant to measure the time we now were faking. "So you're never late for our future," she whispered. The irony was a physical blow. I had brought my gift in a simple, worn portfolio. I slid out the large, archival sheet. It was the original charcoal sketch for her portrait, the very first lines I'd ever drawn of her. It was raw, full of the trembling, awestruck love I'd felt that day in the studio. A piece of my soul, fossilized on paper. I watched her face as she took it in. Her eyes widened, her lips parted. Then, the tears came. They were perfect, glistening trails of what looked like profound, moved love. She pressed the paper to her chest. "It's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me," she choked out. I saw it then, with chilling clarity. These weren't tears of remorse. They were the tears of a consummate actress, moved by the power of her own performance, by the tragedy of the scene. She was crying for the beauty of the lie itself. To sell my own role, I leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, lingering kiss, the kind our anniversaries deserved. Her lips were familiar, a topography I had once known as home. The muscle memory of love, of 1,000 such kisses, surged up, a phantom limb pain so acute it nearly shattered my calm. I almost broke. I almost pulled her close and begged for the truth. But I didn't. I ended the kiss, gently brushing a fake tear from her cheek with my thumb. "I love you," I said, pouring every ounce of my remaining conviction into the lie. At home, the moment she drifted into a satisfied, champagne-assisted sleep, I went to the bathroom. I locked the door. I turned on the faucet, the water scalding hot. I stared at my reflection, the agreeable, doting boyfriend from the evening. Then, I scrubbed my lips. With a washcloth, over and over, until they burned raw and red. I needed to erase the feeling, the taste of the performance. I looked back into the mirror, water dripping from my chin. The man staring back was different. His eyes were no longer just hurt. They were watchful. Calculating. He had learned something vital tonight: he could act, too. He could match her performance, line for line, kiss for kiss. The realization wasn't a victory, it was a chilling descent. The quiet boy who loved too much was gone. In his place was a student of the same dark art that had destroyed him, and his graduation was now only a matter of time. Why grief solidified into something usable, fuel. The silent man in the apartment was no longer mourning, he was building. The blueprint was drawn from everything I'd neglected while orbiting her sun. I began at dawn. While she slept, I slipped out to the gym. The clank of weights, the burn in my muscles, was a new language. It spoke of strength, of reclaiming the physical space I occupied. I dug out my old professional portfolio from the back of the closet, dust clinging to the leather like the residue of my old self. I opened it to sketches I'd abandoned, concepts for graphic novels, character designs, vibrant worlds that had no place in our beige, curated life. I started to draw again, not fractures, but futures. I called Ben and Leo, friends whose calls I'd let go to voicemail because she found them a bit loud, or not really our vibe. We met at a dive bar with sticky floors and raucous laughter. I didn't talk about her. We talked about everything else. For 3 hours, I didn't think about the ghost in her scarf or the receipt in her coat. I was just a man, laughing with his friends. It felt like stealing back pieces of my soul. My silence at home changed. It was no longer the heavy, wounded quiet of December. It was a focused, potent stillness. I was present, but my mind was elsewhere, on a new design, on a client email I was drafting, on the pleasant ache in my shoulders from a new personal best. She felt the shift immediately. It was a change in atmospheric pressure. Her tactics evolved. The guilt-driven extravagance morphed into a desperate, smothering affection. She'd cling to me on the couch, her arms too tight, planting kisses on my neck as I tried to read. She'd cook elaborate meals, filling the apartment with smells that once meant love but now smelled like panic. Her stories became more elaborate, her work meetings now included detailed, unnecessary anecdotes about female colleagues, as if to preempt suspicion. Her love became a cage made of silk. One evening, as I was sketching at the kitchen table, she hovered behind me. I could feel her anxiety like a chill. She rested her chin on my shoulder, a gesture that once made me melt. Now, it felt like a weight. "Are you pulling away from me?" she asked, her voice small, laced with a real fear that had nothing to do with losing me, and everything to do with losing control. The irony was a surgical knife, sliding between my ribs with a perfect, painless precision. I put my pencil down. I didn't turn around. I just stared at the strong, clean lines of the warrior I was drawing, a character who carried his own sword. "I'm just busy," I said, my voice calm, neutral. "Trying to get back to myself." A week later, she launched her grand offensive. She'd made her famous hot chocolate, the ultimate peace offering. We sat on the floor by the Christmas tree, its lights now a sad, post-holiday reminder. She took my hand, her eyes wide with a manufactured dream. "I've been thinking," she began, her thumb stroking my palm. "This place is getting small. We should look for a bigger apartment. Together. Maybe even get a dog. A golden retriever. We could really lock it all down, you know. Build our forever." The words hung in the air, a beautiful, tragic final act to her play. She was trying to nail the coffin shut on the man I had been, to entomb the new, quiet version of me in a future of her design. I looked at her. I let my lips curl into the shape of a smile, but I made sure my eyes stayed still, cool, and miles away. I let the silence stretch until I saw the first flicker of true uncertainty in her gaze. "Let's think about it," I said, my tone gentle, yet utterly, devastatingly noncommittal. I saw it then, the fissure. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the flawless porcelain of her perfect world. It wasn't in anything I said. It was in what I didn't say. For the first time, her script had no next line. The audience had just declined to applaud. The final piece of evidence wasn't found in a coat pocket or a blurry photo. It arrived in the quiet of a Sunday morning, blinking innocently on a screen she'd left open on the couch. I was clearing our breakfast plates. Her laptop glowed on the coffee table, a beacon in our dim living room. I wasn't snooping. I was just passing by when the notification popped up in the lower right corner. A soft ping that seemed to echo. Slack. Mark Chen, Marketing. The preview text was devastating in its simplicity. "Can't stop thinking about last night. You're addictive." The world didn't tilt. It crystallized. I stood there, a dirty plate in my hand, and understood everything with a cold, surgical clarity. This wasn't just an affair of stolen moments in hotel bars. This was woven into the fabric of her daily life. They communicated here, in this bland, professional app, amidst threads about quarterly reports and team lunches. My love had been an inconvenience, scheduled around her day. Their secret was a part of her workflow, a tab left open next to her emails. The intimacy of it was the deepest cut. I didn't slam the plate down. I didn't wake her, screaming, from her lie of asleep. I placed the china gently in the sink. The quiet was absolute, more profound than any noise. I walked to my desk, my sanctuary of quiet reclamation. I opened my own laptop. The anger wasn't hot, it was a frozen river, powerful and directing. I opened the digital canvas I'd been working on in secret. The file was named erasure_01. It was a self-portrait, but not as I was. It was a portrait of disappearance. I had used a reference photo from last Christmas, my face full of a love I now mourned. With meticulous digital brushes, I had begun to dissolve my own features. Pixels bled away from the edges of my smile, my eyes, scattering into a silent, eternal snowfall. It was me, being unmade by the cold that had entered our home. It was the man who believed in forever, turning into nothing more than a weather pattern. I worked for an hour, refining the fall of each digital snowflake. This was my testament. Not a scream, but a vanishing act observed in perfect detail. She padded out of the bedroom, yawning. "What are you working on so intently?" she asked, coming to kiss my temple. I didn't flinch. "Just a new piece," I said, my voice steady. "Feeling inspired." She hummed, content, and went to make more coffee, completely unaware that the man she thought she controlled had just finished mapping his own extinction. My cursor hovered over the upload button on ArtStation, a platform I hadn't touched since I met her. My profile was a relic, covered in the dust of my abandoned dreams. I titled the piece, "Erasure I, the Thaw." The description was a single line: "The process begins with a quiet storm." I took a breath, not of anxiety, but of finality. I clicked post. A green notification flashed: "Your work is now live." It was done. The rebirth was no longer an internal, hidden struggle. It was a public declaration of dissolution. The first flag planted in the ruins of who I was. The quiet man was gone. The artist, rising from the snow, had just signed his work. The Erasure series began to breathe in the digital world. Likes turned into shares, shares into comments filled with thoughtful, piercing interpretations strangers saw in my vanishing act. A direct message arrived. It was from Elena, a curator who'd shown interest in my work a lifetime ago. "This new direction is breathtakingly raw," she wrote. "I have a slot for a small, focused showcase in 2 months. Are you interested?" The man I was becoming had a gravity the old me never possessed. He drew things toward him: attention, opportunity, a future. She felt the shift like a change in the earth's pull. My phone buzzed with Elena's follow-up message as we sat at the kitchen island one evening. I saw her eyes dart to the screen, to the sender's name, a name she didn't recognize, from a world she wasn't part of. The panic in her eyes was immediate, pure, and utterly illuminating. It wasn't fear of losing me. It was the terror of losing control, of watching the set piece she'd built start to rotate without her direction. She struck that night. It began with a sigh, a slammed cupboard door, the overture to a familiar symphony. "What's going on with you?" she demanded, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt. "You're a million miles away. You're secretive. You're on your phone all the time with people I don't know." She spun a tale of neglect, of my coldness, of a secret life I was cultivating. She painted herself as the wounded, devoted partner, clutching the edges of the sink as if for strength. It was her greatest performance yet, a dramatic, desperate attempt to reclaim the narrative, to cast me as the villain so she could remain the blameless star. I let her speak. I didn't move from my stool. I watched the performance, the tears that now struck me as technical achievements. I let her build her entire case on the foundation of her lies. The room filled with the sound of her accusations, her rehearsed grief. When she finally ran out of breath, chest heaving, the silence I left was a physical void. She expected a defense. An argument. A chance to fight and win and restore the broken equilibrium. I said nothing. Calmly, I picked up my phone. My fingers were steady. I navigated to the photo, the one that had given the ghost a face. I zoomed in with precision, until the image was just the bar, the crimson sleeve, her hand resting on his forearm. I placed the phone on the cool marble between us and slid it toward her, slowly. The sound of the glass scraping was the only noise. She looked down. Her performance collapsed in an instant. The tears froze. The righteous anger melted into confusion, then into a dawning, horrific comprehension. All the color drained from her face, leaving a stark, bloodless mask. Her lips, which had just been forming such beautiful lies, parted slightly. No sound came out. She stared at the proof, her eyes flickering over the pixels she couldn't deny. Her hand, the very one in the photo, lifted halfway from the countertop as if to block the image, then fell limply. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Every lie she'd told, every boring work party, every guilty kiss on my forehead, every tender whisper, they all echoed in that silence, mocking her. Her script had failed. There was no line for this. No dramatic line to counter a truth so blatantly, quietly displayed. The silence in the room expanded, growing denser, heavier than any scream could ever be. It was filled with the wreckage of her double life and the cold, patient truth of my witness. I simply watched her, watched the woman I loved disappear, replaced by a stranger caught in the act. The confrontation was over, and not a single word had been needed from me. Her guilt, now, was a silent tenant in the room, and it was all hers to bear. The silence broke her. It poured out of her in a torrent, a flood of tears, explanations, and tangled stories that were just more beautiful, desperate fiction. It meant nothing, she sobbed, her body crumpling into the kitchen chair, her face buried in hands that had touched him. It was one mistake, I was confused, the champagne, the pressure, she spun a tale of vulnerability, of a moment of weakness, a narrative designed to elicit rescue. Then she reached for me, her eyes wide and pleading. But I came home to you. Don't you see? I came home because you're my real love. It's always been you. I listened. I stood there, a statue in the space that used to be our home, and let the words wash over me. They had no weight anymore. They were just sounds, the final, frantic lines of a cancelled show. When her words dissolved into hiccuping cries, I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, and it cut through the noise like a blade through fog. You didn't come home to love me, I said. You came home to be loved by me. There's a difference. She stared, uncomprehending. I've known since Christmas, I continued, the simple statement landing with the force of a verdict. I saw you. In the snow. Outside the bar. The devastation that reshaped her face then was profound, but it wasn't about losing me. It was the horror of an actress who has just realized she's been performing her heart out to an empty theater for weeks. Every tender kiss, every loving gesture, every whispered, "I missed you," had been met with my silent, knowing observation. Her entire performance, her Oscar-worthy guilt, had been for no one. The audience had seen the real ending before the third act. The realization stripped her bare, leaving not a grieving lover, but a humiliated performer. I didn't wait for her next line. I turned and walked to our bedroom. I took the old duffel bag from the top shelf and packed with a methodical dispassion. A few changes of clothes. My laptop. The folder with my original sketches. The cold, expensive watch from our anniversary went into the desk drawer. I left behind the ghost of the man who lived here. She appeared in the doorway, a shell of herself. Where are you going? We can fix this, we can talk. I zipped the bag. The sound was final. I walked past her, through the living room that smelled of her perfume and our dead future. At the front door, I stopped. I didn't look at her. My eyes went to the painting on the wall, the large, beautiful portrait I'd spent months on, capturing a light in her eyes I now knew was a reflection of my own devotion, not her own. The canvas was a monument to my blindness. I walked to it. I lifted it from the hook. It was lighter than I remembered. I didn't destroy it. I simply turned it around, so the blank, raw canvas back faced the room. The beautiful lie was hidden. All that remained was the empty, unprimed foundation. I turned to the door, my bag in one hand. I looked at her one last time. She was just a woman standing in a hallway, small and lost in the script she'd written. Goodbye, Sophia. I closed the door behind me. The click of the latch was softer than a heartbeat, but it was the sound of a world ending. I didn't hear her cry out. I only heard the echo of my own footsteps in the hall, walking away from the museum of us, into the clean, cold air of a truth I no longer had to carry. Time didn't heal. It transformed. The montage began in a sun-drenched studio, a space I rented with walls of windows that let in the light she'd subtly dimmed. I painted not with pain, but with a furious, free passion. Canvases no longer held fractures, they held landscapes of color so vibrant they felt like shouts. My hands, once steady only for her tea, were now stained with the evidence of my own becoming. The showcase opening was a quiet storm. The Erasure series hung under perfect lights. Strangers stood before my dissolving self-portraits, their faces thoughtful, moved. Elena touched my arm, her eyes bright. "You've captured a silent revolution," she said. The critical write-up in the local arts journal used words like brave and phoenix-like. The success wasn't in the praise, but in the ownership. This was mine. Built from ash. I laughed with Ben and Leo at the same dive bar, the sound roaring from my chest, real and unforced. My smile in the photos now reached my eyes, carving new lines of joy around them. I wasn't hiding in the frame anymore, I was occupying it. I bought a fiddle-leaf fig plant. I named it Felix. I learned its language, when it needed water, when it craved the sun. I learned to cook for one, experimenting with spices she would have found too adventurous. The kitchen filled with new smells, garlic, cumin, the scent of my own independence. I saw her once. It was autumn, leaves skittering across the pavement. I was crossing the street, a portfolio under my arm, heading to a client meeting. She was across the intersection, waiting for the light. She looked smaller, her shoulders hunched against a wind that hadn't been blowing a moment before. He was there, Mark, talking at her with sharp, impatient gestures. Her face was turned away, a mask of tight resignation. They were already arguing. It wasn't a scene of triumphant love, it was a snapshot of a reality she'd chosen, already worn and fraying. I felt no satisfaction. No vengeful spark. Only a profound, quiet relief, like surfacing after holding my breath for years. I hadn't lost her to a grand romance. She'd traded a sanctuary for a cage she helped build. The light changed. I walked on, and didn't look back. Back in my studio, the mail sat on my drafting table. A thick, cream-colored envelope, embossed with the logo of the city's most prestigious gallery. My fingers were calm as I slid it open. The letter was formal, elegant. It praised the Erasure series for its emotional clarity and technical brilliance. Then, the offer, a full solo exhibition, scheduled for the spring. 6 months to prepare. The gallery's proposed theme was a single, perfect word, typed in bold at the top of the page. Renaissance. I held the paper, the weight of it more substantial than any anniversary watch. The word echoed in the sunlit room, mingling with the scent of turpentine and fresh paint. It wasn't about erasing the past anymore. It was about what grew, fiercely and beautifully, from the scorched earth. The man in the studio, with paint on his hands and a plant named Felix by the window, looked at the blank canvases waiting. He wasn't vanishing. He was beginning. Christmas lights twinkled again, but this time they illuminated a different world. My world. The gallery walls, once a dream, now held my reality. The Renaissance exhibition was packed, a hum of conversation swirling around canvases of explosive color and defiant form. The air smelled of champagne and possibility. The centerpiece, positioned under a solitary spot, was a large, stunning piece titled The 26th. It was all deep, winter blues and swirling, crystalline whites, a silent, frozen storm. But at its heart, emerging from the ice, was a single, stark, impossibly bright shard of gold. It wasn't being swallowed by the cold, it was being revealed by it, forged in the pressure. It wasn't about her. It was about the profound silence after the fracture, and the alchemy of filling that emptiness with the molten gold of your own worth. Elena touched my elbow. "They're ready for you." I walked to the small podium, a glass of water waiting. The crowd quieted. Faces I knew, faces I didn't, all looking at me not as a victim, but as a creator. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady in the hush. "This exhibition is about truth. Not the kind that's given, but the kind you have to dig for, often with broken tools, in the darkest, coldest places. It's about the moment you stop asking to be seen, and realize you have to become worth seeing." As I spoke about light born from depth, my gaze swept the room. And there, at the very back, nearly obscured by the crowd, was a figure. Her. Sophia. She stood perfectly still, her coat damp with melting snow. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the 26th, her face a canvas of its own, confusion, then dawning, awful understanding. She saw the blizzard she'd created. She saw the gold she'd never been allowed to touch. Her eyes flicked to me. To the man at the podium, in a suit that fit the man I now was, speaking with a calm authority she'd never witnessed. The man she used to know, the one who made her tea and cherished her lies, was gone. In his place stood a stranger of substance and light, illuminated by a spotlight she didn't control. Our eyes held for a fractured second. I didn't falter. I didn't acknowledge her. I simply continued speaking, my words flowing uninterrupted. She couldn't bear it. Before I reached my concluding sentence, she turned. I saw a flash of her profile, a hand rising quickly to her cheek, and then she was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the hallway. I didn't watch her go. I didn't pause to savor the exit of the ghost. I turned my full attention back to the warm, expectant faces before me, to the future gleaming on the walls. I lifted my glass in a toast. To Renaissance, I said, and the room echoed it back, a warm wave that filled the space she had vacated. Later, as the crowd buzzed, I stood before the 26th, feeling the genuine warmth of the spotlight on my skin. It wasn't borrowed. It wasn't reflected. It was earned, stroke by stroke, by my own hands. The silence in my heart was no longer frozen. It was peaceful, full of the echo of my own voice. The greatest revenge was never making her see what she lost. It was finally, exquisitely, seeing what I could become.